Hi, my name is Adrian Taylor. This is Adam Zanzie. This is Forgotten Features, and today we are reviewing Young Sherlock Holmes.
The game is afoot.
So, Young Sherlock Holmes was made in 1985, directed by Barry Levinson, who also did movies such as, I think, Good Morning Vietnam.
And Rain Man and Avalon and Toys and Sleeper. And so Barry Levinson, he's had a very uneven career, but I like a lot of his movies a lot. He's very good at doing Hollywood movies like this and then like personal films about Baltimore where he grew up. And you wouldn't think he'd be the director to do a film about 1800s London, you know, little kids going around fighting crime, but he did a very good job just directing it. I mean, it's well acted, it looks nice, it's good music, it's, you know, what can you say? It's well directed.
Now, this movie has some familiar faces behind the scenes that you probably would already know. So Frank Marshall,
Kathleen
Kennedy, and the big one, Steven Spielberg.
Right.
And this is usually regarded as the forgotten Spielberg movie.
I would say so, because this was the mid-'80s when Spielberg was trying to be more of a producer. Chris Columbus had sent a script called Gremlins that Spielberg really liked, so he gave that to Joe Dante to make, and then he hired Chris Columbus to write 2 other movies for Amblin. One of them was The Goonies, which of course Richard Donner later did. Then there was Young Sherlock Holmes. As we all know, Gremlins became really popular. The Goonies became really popular. This one, though, somehow fell into obscurity. I think it's just bad timing. I mean, it came out in December 1985. It's not like there was a big appetite for British films at the time. I mean, I guess a year before Amadeus had won a lot of Oscars, but it's not like kids wanted to go see a British movie. And
this movie bombed really bad. It made $19 million on an $18 million budget. So it made $1 million over, and not including advertising and whatnot, it didn't even make even, so.
Yeah, and a week before this, Rocky IV had come out, and that was a huge hit. And it's not, you know, again, like I just feel like in the mid-'80s there was no appetite for this kind of movie, even though it had the sense of adventure of the Goonies and Gremlins, but those movies were very American. I can see why cynical adults in the 80s would hate this movie. The fact is, this is the kind of movie that it takes generations to really appreciate it.
Right.
You know, I think the adults of the time would not have gotten it, outside the ones that made it, of course.
And I never saw this, I never even heard of this movie until we decided to review it on our first episode. So I got a DVD of it and started watching it, and I was actually surprised that it did kind of resonate with me a little bit. There are flaws to the movie, like, I mean, I can see things that did not work, but I can definitely see the Spielberg influence. I can see a lot of good character development, especially the actors that portrayed Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, which, if you don't know, those would be Nicholas Rowe and
Alan Cox.
Alan Cox. Sophie Ward played Elizabeth.
Sophie Ward, yeah. Anthony Higgins is in it, and he's really great as Wraith/Atar. But that's another thing, like, this movie didn't really have stars in it. That wasn't a problem for the Goonies and Gremlins. Those were still huge hits, but I mean, these are just really good actors.
Let's compare it to some of the other similar detective movies that came out during the time period. One being The Great Mouse Detective.
Well, The Great Mouse Detective came right after this, and at the time, The Great Mouse Detective's original title was Basil of Baker Street. But when this movie flopped, people thought at Disney, Peter Schneider was like, I think Basil of Baker Street it sounds too British, because I think that was the attitude, is Young Sherlock Holmes flopped because it was a British movie, so then they gave it a more traditional title, The Great Mouse Detective, which everybody at Disney, the animators, threw a fit. They're like, what, are we gonna call Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs a woman and 7 little guys now? You know, so people were pissed off about that and stuff, and so but yeah, it's funny because The Great Mouse Detective and Young Sherlock Holmes, neither one is based on a Doyle story, but they're very interesting reimaginings of taking this, you know, this structure of the detective and his assistant and going off and fighting evil.
Yeah, and it's interesting because all the Sherlock Holmes movies you've seen recently, usually Sherlock Holmes and John Watson are meeting in their like 30s or 40s. You know, they've already kind of grown out of, you know, their schooling phase. But in this movie, They kind of start off in boarding school, you know, they're like 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
It's an interesting take on meeting this early and getting like the character development started early, because initially, from what I've read, this movie was going to be an installment of future films, beginning with this one, and then you'd see the character development progress throughout future movies. Now, unfortunately, that never happened.
The film is more of a footnote in history. When people talk about it, it's mostly remembered as the movie that introduced, you know, the CGI knight which attacks the priest. That was revolutionary for its time.
Yeah, that was actually the very first use of CGI. It's kind of interesting when you think CGI or the first CGI, like you maybe think of Tron or you think of some of the other.
No, but it was this movie, yeah.
Yeah, young Sherlock Holmes, very first use of CGI printed on a laser through film.
Right, that's true. What were some of your favorite scenes?
I really liked the beginning of the movie when John Watson and Sherlock Holmes are first introduced.
Yeah, I love that scene.
Because right off the bat, it's like, you know, Sherlock is showing the audience why he's Sherlock Holmes. John Watson, he comes in, he's like, oh, hi, you know, and Sherlock's like, wait, don't tell me your name.
Let me. Your name is James Watson. You're from the north of England. Your father is a doctor. You spend a considerable amount of leisure time writing, and you have a particular fondness for custard tarts. Am I correct?
My name isn't James, it's John.
Oh, James, John, what's the difference?
A great deal.
Yeah, it's great. Chris Columbus, say what you will about him as a director, but I think he is a good writer, and that's a great just scene of exposition.
Yeah.
That's how you do exposition the right way, for sure.
Yeah, I think that was a good way to introduce us both to those characters. It just, there was no like 10 minutes of just unnecessary dialogue. It's like, this is Sherlock Holmes, this is his shtick, this is what you're gonna be watching the next hour and 15 minutes of this movie for. That would probably be my favorite scene, is the introduction.
One scene that I love, just because I've seen it so many times, is after they have their hallucinations in the graveyard and Watson is attacked by all those pastries and desserts. The next day they're like going over all these clues, and like, you know, Holmes is going, clues, Watson, I want clues, and then Watson pulls out like a little cream puff and he goes,
Yes, Mr. French Pastry. I have nothing whatsoever to say to you. I trust you have nothing to say to me.
Little scenes like that don't hit you the first time, and then as you watch the movie over and over again, the dialogue is great.
What would you say didn't work? What would you improve on? What would you change?
I've seen the movie so many times that it's hard for me to really be objective about it anymore. I guess the one cheesy part is when Wraith Atar dies and Anthony Higgins, when he's falling under the ice, goes like and it's like, oh, that's...
Oh, he's dead, right?
Yeah, a little cliffhanger there at the end of credits for a sequel that never got made and stuff. But for, you know, just so little stuff like that is very... And also, I will say this, they go and rescue Elizabeth from the Round Top Temple, and then she dies anyway. So I always think that's kind of weird how they went through all that trouble to get her, but still, that's also, you could argue that's a good plot twist.
The scene where Elizabeth dies, that hit me harder than I thought it would. I would have liked it though if they maybe had dedicated a little bit more character development to Elizabeth. For the most part, she felt like a love interest. However, you don't expect her to die at the end of the movie.
Yeah, Elizabeth, she's not a complicated character, but she's definitely what I'd call like a plot device for the reasons why Holmes spends his life alone. Because early in the movie, Dudley asks him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Holmes says, I never want to be alone, because he's in love with Elizabeth. Then Elizabeth dies, and that he loses, it creates a hole in his heart. And I think that's why he spends the rest of his life as this obsessed, lonely guy.
Now, the music, I really got, like, in those Spielberg movies, those orchestral soundtracks, I thought John Williams did the soundtrack. Apparently, it was a guy named Bruce Boughton, who he actually won a Saturn Award for the soundtrack for this movie, and I could see why. I think the big reason this movie resonated with me was the orchestral soundtrack.
Yeah, I love the music in this movie, and of course, once you see it many times, the score becomes instantly recognizable.
Yeah, it just kind of gets ingrained in your head. I was just like, wow, this really reminds me of like John Williams and a little bit of Alan Silvestri. So yeah, I would definitely recommend if you have an iTunes account, like to get soundtracks based on movies, then I would definitely pick that one up.
I'd like to meet other fans of this movie because I don't really think I know any other people that have really seen it. I mean, if you go on the internet and do some deep digging, you'll find people that like it. Young Sherlock Holmes is in need of a reconsideration.
I would personally like to see it released on Blu-ray or Ultra HD. I'd like to get...
I'd like making of documentaries of how it was made.
I would like to see the cast kind of reunite and talk about their experience.
Me too,
if we're lucky and the people that created this movie happen to see our review of it, we would like to get a retrospective of it. We want to get commentaries and a new Blu-ray release or something that can kind of give more towards the people that have made this into a cult following.
Right. I agree.
So I would totally like to see that, and I would pick it up for sure.
Me too.
The game is afoot.
Thank you again for watching, everybody. This is Forgotten Features. Adrian Taylor, Adam Zanzie. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. We hope to be making more episodes in the future, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.